Thank you for attending tonight's presentation and dialogue on attainable housing. We'd like to first just make an introduction of ourselves.
Hi, I'm Marty Olejniczak, the Community Development Director for the City of Sturgeon Bay.
Mariah Goode, Director of the Door County Land Use Services Department and also a member of the Door County Housing Partnership Board.
Amy Kohnle, Director of United Way here in Door County.
Wallace, President of the Door County Housing Partnership.
And Myles Dannhausen from the Peninsula Pulse.
Becky Kerwin, Door County Land Use Services Planner.
We'd also like to thank Sturgeon Bay Schools, Dan Chernagel and Sturgeon Bay Schools for the use of this great facility. And thank each of you for coming tonight. I'm Jim Schuessler with Door County Economic Development, a public-private organization for over the past 30 years and continuing is focused on the mission of improving the economic vitality for Door County and its citizens. DCDC's Attainable Housing Committee has been working together for over a decade to help address the housing issue, which really runs to the core of our overall county sustainability. There's been some success in this area, and we're going to talk about that a bit tonight. Part of our mission here is to help increase the awareness of the attainable housing problem, our demographics, economic trends, and increase the level of understanding the economic reality for some folks that live here, and through their work, help provide important services to the economic ecosystem to Door County. Many of them have children that attend our schools, which is also important to the sustainability of our schools. We're focused on solutions to addressing the problem of attainable housing. That problem appears to be increasing. We know that working collaboratively, we can both solve the need for attainable housing and maintain the overall rural nature of Door County. We're not here alone. There are good prospective partners in the development community, as well as organizations like NeighborWorks, Wisconsin Housing Economic Development Authority, Wisconsin Economic Development Association, just to name a few. So there's a lot to unpack here tonight, and we do welcome your questions as we proceed. Mariah?
Not Mariah, but I'm going to take the next section. So we'll quickly go through some of the definitions and background pertaining to the housing issue in Door County. A few quick definitions. What is affordable housing? Well, at the individual level, it's housing that costs no more than 30% of the household income for that family. At the community level, it's housing that the median income level can afford using no more than 30% of their gross income. That includes utilities and other things related to housing. So what is the median household income in Door County? It's $56,500. That's the point where half of the households in Door County earn more than that figure and half of the households earn less than that figure. So if you did earn $56,500 as a household and applied that 30% rule, you could afford about $17,000 a year towards housing and it's still considered to be affordable. Workforce housing is a term that's also kicked around. It's also called attainable housing. Generally, when we're talking about workforce housing, we're talking about housing geared towards families that are earning between 60 and 120% of the median income. All right, so what are some of the issues affecting Door County? Yeah, some of these have been around for decades. Others are relatively new phenomena. The general shortage of rental and seasonal worker housing is one. A couple of things that we're seeing we've seen for a long time is the second home market. I remember back in the 90s that was an issue in Door County, and it's still that way to today, competing with people who are only buying a house for occasional use. The increase in tourism it has led to a conversion of some homes to transient rentals. That has an impact on the supply of housing available for affordable housing available for residents. A few other things that on the list that I want to point out, the lack of land designated for multifamily denser housing. If we're going to try to increase the supply, we need to have lands that can accommodate that type of housing. And another thing that we're hearing from developers is it's more profitable to develop the high-end stuff. If they can make more money doing that, why would they want to build the more affordable units? One of the things that was on the list is the areas that are served by sewer. It helps to have public sewer and water in order to do denser housing. One of the problems in Door County is very few areas can accommodate that. It's pretty much the city of Sturgeon Bay, the villages, and a few of the unincorporated communities that have public sewer, and it's even less for water. You're talking Sturgeon Bay, Sister Bay, and Maplewood, only places with public water. What are the construction costs? This is a pretty general slide, but you can see both with sewer and non-sewer, it's tough to build affordably. A lot with sewer and water and all the infrastructure in the city is going to cost between 50,000 is more of the higher end lots, but even in a basic workforce type subdivision, you're still going to look at least $20,000 to $30,000 just for your lot, and then the house costs, you can see that it can add up in a hurry. A few other issues. We all know housing relates to attracting residents and maintaining those residents. But there's also a few other issues that affect our ability to grow our population. Some of these are on the list. Employment opportunities. Being a peninsula, it's a little bit harder to find employment in some cases. The fact that our tourism economy is very seasonal. Transportation issues, daycares is something we hear a lot in Sturgeon Bay. These are all issues that kind of relate to housing and go along with the housing problem in Door County. Regarding the aging population, this slide's kind of interesting. We all hear that, sometimes it's the oldest county in Wisconsin, sometimes it's the second oldest or third oldest. Regardless of what actual ranking Door County has, we do know that we're older than the state. So in this slide, you can see that in 2010, 23% of our population was 65 and over compared to 14% for the state, and projected to go up to 38% in 2040 as compared to 24% to the state. So no matter how you slice it, we're getting older. We need to accommodate senior housing, and the housing study that was done did address that component as well. So now, I think Amy is next. I'll turn it over to her.
Good evening, everyone. So, I thought everyone was employed. We hear about this unemployment. We have no unemployment. Everybody's looking for jobs, or excuse me, all the employers are looking for jobs. Everyone's employed. So shouldn't we all be doing well in Door County? Well, representing United Way, I'm here today to talk about ALICE. ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. So who is ALICE? Somebody's singing it in their head, I know. I do every time. So 17 different states throughout the nation that have United Ways have collaborated with Rutgers University in northern New Jersey to complete the ALICE study. So the data that we have is based on local data that has been analyzed at the state level and then analyzed through Rutgers University to make sure that we're all 17 states are comparing their data in the exact same way. If you look at the two purple sheets, and I know the lights are dim, so you can't necessarily see, but the two sheets that you picked up with a lot of, oh, thank you. Look, you ask and the lights magically appear. So if you look at this sheet on the top chart there shows the percent of poverty on the bottom of that bar graph, and then it goes up to the percent of population that's living in ALICE, so that asset limited, income constrained, employed, those folks struggling to make ends meet. And then the upper section of that is the folks that are hopefully able to have a stable household and make ends meet. The back sheet of that, in very fine print, so you can read that at home, in the upper right-hand corner has it broken down by community in Door County to see how many households within each of our communities are in either poverty or in our Alice population. The sheet that I really want you to look at now is this one, the one with the two large charts on it. So the top of that is the survival budget. So a single adult, such as myself, is on the far right-hand side, and then the left-hand side. Wow. I took cold medicine, sorry folks. Left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side is 2 adults with 1 infant and 2 preschoolers, and every family situation is there in between, assuming there's 2 kids in the household. So the Alice study looked at all of our various budget categories. So housing, which includes your utility costs. As a single adult, if I'm making $10 an hour or $9.98, I can afford housing with utilities of $500 per month. Go ahead and laugh. We know that doesn't exist. Food, $158. Transportation, not including a car payment, so just my auto insurance and then my gas, my tire rotation, oil changes, those sorts of things, $349 per month. Healthcare, so whether that's some of my out-of-pocket expense, my prescription costs, whatever that might be, $214. Miscellaneous, they budgeted 10% for miscellaneous, $151 per month. Technology includes my phone, so that could be my Wi-Fi, my data package, whatever it might be for me to have the technology that I need. Taxes, and then your monthly total and annual total. So those are your bare bones just to survive, folks, on the top. If you go down to the bottom, you see the stability budget. And that's that now we've moved out of federal poverty, we've moved out of Alice, and we're stable. So then you can see there that single adult needs to be making $16.58 an hour, and 2 adults with 1 infant and 1 preschooler combined somehow between those 2 adults needs to be making almost $54 an hour to make ends meet. So we wanted to point that out to you so you could see that. So this slide just reviews those survival budgets. If I'm a single adult, $20,000 a year, and then as a 2 adult, 1 preschool, 1 infant, up to $58,000. And then the stability budget, $33,000 for that single adult, and then $107,000 for that family. What we really wanted to point out to you as well tonight is how Door County compares to the rest of Wisconsin. So in 2010, the percent of folks in poverty in Door County was 9%. In 2016, 10%. The folks in Alice, 18% in 2010, for a total of 27% of our population struggling. And then jumping ahead to 2016, a total of 32% of our population is struggling. You compare that to the state had a combined total of 37% in 2010, and then a combined total of 38% in 2016. So as you can tell, things in Door County are getting a little worse. We're having more people, a little bit more in the poverty, but definitely a lot more in Alice in that group that's working but struggling to make ends meet.
So I'm here to talk about incomes and housing budgets compared to housing purchase costs. Amy just talked about the Alice component in the county and the states, and here we are looking at the median, county area median income, and we divide that amount by 12 months to get to a housing budget of just over $1,400. That's for the median county income, somebody earning that dollar amount. And then on the bottom here, Alice, for an Alice survival household, can only afford that $733 amount, and the stability household can only afford a couple hundred more than that. So when you look at what Alice says households can afford, it's well below what somebody making the county median income can afford. And so when we look at some home purchase statistics in the county, you can see in the lower right-hand corner we have the median inland sales dollar amounts for Northern Door, Sturgeon Bay, and Southern Door. So we're looking at just homes that are inland, no waterfront, no water view for those three areas. And a typical mortgage payment for those median homes for Northern Door, Sturgeon Bay, and Southern Door are there in the upper right-hand corner, and then we have the home loan assumptions in the lower left-hand corner. And so we took 8 occupations that are earning below the county median income. Some are very close to the county median income towards the top there. So 4 of the occupations are between the median household income and the ALICE stability budget. And then we have 4 occupations that are below the ALICE stability budget, but still above the $7.25 an hour minimum wage. And so this first slide, we're looking at a patrol officer's income. Entry-level wage, take that person's wage, divide by 12 months to get to a monthly housing budget. And we have to consider that that person will probably have student loan debt from an associate's degree from a community college. So the center column, we're looking at no debt. The right column, we're looking at some student loan debt. And so when we factor in or multiply by 30% the HUD definition of housing affordability, and then factor in student loan debt, we're looking at a pretty significant gap in Northern Door between what a patrol officer can afford for housing and what a typical mortgage payment would cost in Northern Door. And then Sturgeon Bay and Southern Door are more affordable, but not in Northern Door. So you may ask, well, why should we expect somebody earning entry-level income to afford a median-priced home? Well, remember we excluded the waterfront, water view homes, so we're just looking at inland homes. And the waterfront, when we consider waterfront and water view, they're all pretty significantly higher than the inland median home prices. And our figures are probably also very optimistic because we're using pre-tax income per the HUD formula. Many buyers put less than 10% down. Many buyers typically put 5% down. Mortgage payments don't cover utilities. For HUD, affordable means your housing budget is covering the utilities also. Then we also did not consider car payment or credit card debt in our calculations. So next, I'm just going to quickly flip through the remaining occupation slides. So you see here, this is a registered nurse, somebody who needs a 4-year degree, so they're going to have twice the student loan debt as an associate's degree. And you can see the gap has gotten wider in Northern Door in red there, and then in Sturgeon Bay and Southern Door, the surplus is less. Here we're looking at a county social worker, nurse, elementary teacher. This is the first occupation that it can't afford a median-priced home anywhere in the county. All those numbers are in red there. Looking at a welder, cutter, solderer here. Construction laborer, hotel, motel clerk, and a cook. And these are all occupations that are widely needed throughout the county, both for essential human services and for the economy. And so this is a summary slide of the top 5 occupations. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, only the upper 3 occupations can afford a median-priced home in Sturgeon Bay and Northern Door. The rest of the occupations cannot afford a median-priced home anywhere. Okay, Mariah's going to talk about income and housing budgets compared to housing rental costs.
All right, well, if they can't buy, maybe they can just rent. So these are what was available for rentals in the middle of April when I took a look at apartmentfinder.com. There were about 30 different apartment groupings listed on there, and I couldn't think of anything that I knew of in Door County that had rental apartments or units that was not on that list. At the time that I looked in the middle of April, 21 of those 30 listings didn't have any availability at all. And so let's take a look at the numbers that we have here. Now on the top is the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development fair market rent for 2018. Now, fair market rent is what HUD uses when they're determining payments for certain federal assistance programs. But you might notice, and those are intended for lower income people, but even so, you might notice that there's a huge gap between the numbers that HUD considers fair market, which are going to be affordable to people that are lower income, and what's actually out there for people to rent right now. The other thing you might notice is that I didn't see a single efficiency or 4-bedroom apartment anywhere on the website. And there were not that many 3 bedrooms. Everything that was available to rent was either 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom. And in Sister Bay, there were only 2 bedrooms. The only 1 bedrooms were in Sturgeon Bay. Door County has done, through the Economic Development Corporation over the years, some surveys of rental properties in the county to try and determine vacancy rate. And we almost always have a vacancy rate of around 2%. That's considered very, very low. Nationally, if you're below 4%, it's considered very low. So let's look at, similar to what Becky did, let's look at those same occupations for those single entry-level workers compared to rent prices. So this doesn't look so bad. The patrol officer and the registered nurse and the county social worker or county nurse can afford an apartment. And we used the countywide average 1-bedroom rent. And they can afford it whether they have debt or no debt for student loans. But remember, they have to actually find an apartment that's open and available, which is a huge problem. And then also keep in mind that just like the same exact figures that Becky looked at, we're not counting credit card or car payment debt. And rent usually does not include your utilities, so that's not included here. And again, all these housing budget figures are pre-tax income. Now, when we move down to elementary teacher, welder, cutter, solder, and construction laborer, it starts looking a little bit worse. Some of these folks start having a gap as far as being able to afford or not. Can everybody out there see the difference between the red and the black font? Because it's kind of hard from up here. Okay. But yeah, so once you get down to some of these, see, and then hotel and motel clerk and cook, got gaps for what they can afford. Now Diana's going to talk about the Faith Prosperity Coalition.
My journey to becoming the president of the Door County Housing Partnership really started with a group called the Interfaith Prosperity Coalition. And it was a group of people from Northern Door. They were all associated with a religious group, came together to see what they could do. And last year, when we were all really anxiously awaiting the survey results, we talked about the fact that the data is critical, the numbers show us what direction to go, and intellectually, we all understand that affordable housing is very important. However, we needed to put a face to the challenge. And so this group commissioned a videographer to interview and video 8 different people from Door County describing their stories. There is a 20-minute video, and here's a little plug for it. These DVDs are available at the public library, but you can also go onto YouTube and just type in Door County, a place of our own, and see the 20-minute version. It's quite impactful, and I think it really brings home the issue that so many folks are facing.
The beauty of Door County camouflages the challenges faced by our neighbors and friends trying to live and work here year-round. Finding safe, affordable, and dignified housing can be overwhelming because very little exists. Recent studies underline this crisis, but have not revealed its impact on the people who struggle to find a place of our own. It is time we hear their voices.
When I started searching for housing in Door County, I was expecting it to be relatively easy, and especially being from here, knowing people, I would have thought that I would find things relatively quickly, and that has not been the case at all. I'm still looking. I'm still looking, and I've been living back home now for just over 3 years.
but for pretty much for 10 days I was homeless. I lived in a tent and pitching a tent often in different places every night. And that's the way it went for a while. And then I saw an advertisement in the Pulse for a cottage in Sturgeon Bay. And I went down and met the owner and said, I'll take it on the spot. I think that if you look at places to stay up here, you better bring your checkbook, because right away I knew you wouldn't get two chances at this.
The quality of the housing that those of us have to resort to due to lower income levels, I have found in the 30-plus years that I've been in Door County, is very poor.
I don't think from the time I moved in to the time that I left that the heat worked. I could see through the roof, and I'd lay down in my bed at night and I could see the sky through the ceiling. And again, mold everywhere. Everywhere you looked, there was mold. Mold everywhere. And I ended up living there because it's the only place I could afford for maybe 5 months, and I got sick. And I said, that's it.
Affordable to me would probably mean something that's not going to break my bank, you know, to where I don't have to have basically 4 or 5 jobs to pay my month's rent. You know, affordable to me would be, you know, $600-700 for a 2-bedroom or even a 1-bedroom. You know, paying $1,200 for a 2-bedroom, that's not affordable living. At least in my eyes, my opinion, that who can afford that?
In the community we live in up here, which is, as we all know, tourism is one of our, you know, it's a big engine up here. And to have that engine run smoothly, you have to have the people behind the scenes that do the work. And over the many years that I've been here, so often these people do not have a place to live, and they actually will turn around and go home. I've seen it happen.
If you really care about your community as much as you say that you do, keep an open mind and help us work through this problem. Because I'd like to see my friends who are living in their cars in a home. I'd like to see their kids not have to move every 6 months because there's no year-round housing. And that's really the big part, is just remember who it is that you're forcing to sleep in a car at night. It's the woman that sells you your prescription. It's the woman that serves you your food when you go out to eat. It's the person who cleans the rooms in the hotel where your family stays. They have faces. They have faces, and I think people forget that.
So when we were having our technological problem, some of the questions started coming in as to why isn't anybody doing anything, or what has been done, or what are we going to do? So let's talk about that for a while. So there actually, and I know this has been a problem for decades, many decades, but there actually has been a fair amount that's been going on. So I don't want people to think that nobody's been doing anything. So the Door County Economic Development Corporation Attainable Housing Committee that Jim referenced has actually been around for 20 years because Amy and I have been on it for that long. But we're only 30, so it's really, and that's done a lot to encourage collaboration and cooperation and coordination and communication between all of the agencies that are active in the county, whether nonprofit or government agencies that are working to help people get into housing. So there's been a lot of education and awareness activities. I don't know if any of you in 2001 saw the Gibraltar Girls senior project where they went out and did very much what we just did. They went out and looked at places that were for sale that were supposedly affordable to see how that stacked up against incomes. We've had a couple housing summits. The Door County Board of Realtors has assisted with some of the educational efforts. There have been several studies and rental housing inventories. There's a collaborative film that was created in 2017 between the Economic Development Corporation, Peninsula Filmworks, and the Board of Realtors that highlights some of the lending programs that are out there. So that's kind of getting to the question that came earlier about trying to let people know about these programs. We've worked at the county, the city of Sturgeon Bay, and at some of the village levels to try and revise zoning ordinances to make it easier for people to do housing that might be able to be more affordable to folks. And we've also facilitated projects. So one example at the county level is we've created a new small lot district, and we've got some secondary dwelling unit allowances. The city has worked to redevelop the former Wiretech property as 17 affordable homes. And we've had some development community and employer-driven solutions that in some cases have been proposed, in some cases have gone through, but sometimes the proposals are met with resistance. So this is a recent example of something that a developer just decided to do to build a moderately priced home for Door County. This is 1,100 square feet, 2 bedrooms, about $150,000. Although one of the things on the slide that Marty had up earlier when he talked about one of the reasons that it's so expensive in Door County, it's always been more expensive to construct homes in Door County because of our geography. And now in 2018, construction prices have skyrocketed everywhere in the country. So there's still more going on. We've had a lot of community development block grant funds, and those are federal dollars come through the county. And I saw that there are now CDBG handouts on the back table if you didn't get those, if they weren't there when you came in. So thank you to whoever brought those. So there's a down payment assistance program that we've had close to $500,000 that 44 families have availed themselves of since 2005. We've had another $220,000+ in rehab assistance loans in the county through those community development block grant monies. We have the Door County Housing Authority, which provides rental assistance. Those are federal dollars through what's called the Section 8 voucher program. And that you can see goes, just the last 3 years is anywhere between about $670,000 to $700,000 that's being cycled through the county for rental assistance for qualifying families. Some families also can be assisted with home purchase with those same dollars. We have Lakeshore Community Action Programs. This is the entity in Door County that does most of the home buyer education for county families that are going through such training, which is often a requirement of some of these other programs. We have Habitat for Humanity, which is in the midst of finishing up its 42nd house in the county. They've also been doing more with home repairs, so there have been nearly 60 homes that have, through Habitat, gotten home repairs since 2000. We also have the U.S. Department of Agricultural Rural Development Program. So they've assisted with different types of home buyer loans to the tune of over $21 million in the county in the last 20 years, and also repair loans. We have some joint projects that Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority and the USDA Rural Development have done together. They've rehabilitated over 100 units in Sturgeon Bay. And then we have WIDA, which is what somebody asked about earlier, Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority. They've helped build recently 24 new low-income housing tax credit units in Sister Bay. They're next to the Piggly Wiggly and the daycare, if any of you are familiar with that neighborhood. And they've also, WIDA has also provided over 130 loans to home buyers in the last 20 years in an total amount of over $18 million. So there are people that are availing themselves of these funds, but I had a similar experience to the woman who asked the question earlier. When I bought my home 20 years ago, nobody told me about WIDA, and I actually could have qualified. This is an example. The WIDA developer that did the 24 units up in Sister Bay near the daycare has been doing some projects in Oshkosh as well. These are two WIDA developments on the river in Oshkosh. I believe one is senior housing and one is workforce housing. Just some samples of what's being done in Northeast Wisconsin. So new and more recent efforts. We have a study that came out in 2019, which Jim is going to talk about a little bit more in detail. We had a symposium after that in February to try and gather all the players together. So people from WIDA, from USDA, from Lakeshore CAP, from Habitat, from all of the organizations that are up here to talk about what we're going to do next. We've got towns that are starting to get in the action now that are talking about the issue. Previously, it was mostly just the county and the city of Sturgeon Bay and some of the villages. And we do have a housing trust. So Diana's going to talk a little bit more about that later, but we did form a Door County Housing Trust Partnership. Well, it's called Door County Housing Partnership, and that is now, we have our nonprofit status and our articles of incorporation and everything filed. We have the Interfaith Prosperity Coalition activities, which you've just seen at least a portion of the longer video. And before you leave, if you didn't get a chance to look out in the lobby at the banners that are out there, there's the still life photographs and some quotes from the interviews that are out there as well. And then we have NeighborWorks Green Bay, which Jim mentioned earlier, which is a nonprofit that works in conjunction with the city of Green Bay to do a lot of really innovative things with regard to housing. Their territory actually includes Door County. To date, I think they've mostly just done home buyer education with Door County folks, but they're interested in possibly doing some actual building up here. This is an example of a NeighborWorks project that's in the city of Green Bay. It's 5 owner-occupied townhomes. Now Jim's going to tell us about the study.
So back when Caleb Frostman was still director of the Economic Development Organization, they banded together with the public-private sector and ordered a housing study. We released the housing study results back in February, and a couple weeks later there was an article in the Pulse. Thanks, Myles. It was a letter to the editor. It's not fair to call it an article. And somebody saying, my God, we know we've had a housing study forever. Why on earth do you commission a study? And I understand that naivete. I knew a lot back before I got into economic development about how all that stuff worked, and then I learned a lot about how it really works and the importance of investing in studies on important things like this, because largely the private sector is going to solve these housing issues that have been plaguing Door County for decades. Largely the private sector has already been solving it, just not enough, clearly. And so getting that study done really helps those developers with the metrics, the numbers, what is needed. And so it gave us some really good data to use. And now we're going to work in using this data. So the housing study broke the county down in 3 sections, as you can see. So, am I in trouble, Eddie, if I move over here? Okay, thanks. Northern Door County, as you can see, is anything north of Sevastopol. Central Door County encompasses the town and the city of Sturgeon Bay, the town of Neswapi, as well as the town of Sevastopol. And then the southern portion is everything else in Door County. It focused on 3 important areas: year-round workforce housing, which has already been identified what that means; senior housing, which we've definitely identified a significant need for; and then seasonal housing beds. These are all the investors. It was important to have this investment come from both the public and private sector, and we're very, very appreciative that everybody put their shoulder into making this thing happen. AECOM was the consultant that was chosen. So here's the numbers, and just to give you a little background, it takes a look at 2010 through 2017. That's pretty much after the Great Recession, up until about the time that the study was getting rolling. And then there's another period going from 2018 to 2023. Well, a bit about development is if we signed on the dotted line with a development in the village of Sister Bay today, it's the likelihood that probably would not break ground until next spring, especially in Sister Bay because they've got some very, very complicated rules on development. Which means it would not come online until, chances are, 2021, well into that window. So when I look at the numbers here, we had a huge gap from that 2010 to 2017, but I also pretty much absorbed that 2018 to 2023 because we're about halfway into that development window. So workforce rental apartments, what it called for in Northern Door County was 140. Within that second window, 65, so 205 units. Central Door County, it called for 330 plus another 45, so 375. Southern Door County, according to this study, was in good shape as it related to workforce apartment units. So we know in Sturgeon Bay, we've got 162 apartments in some stage of development. We've got another city with a pre-annexation agreement, Mayor Ward told me is very close to moving forward. That'll give us another 60 behind target. But as you can see, even with all that housing in the pipeline, and it's been absorbing as quickly as it comes online, we have incredible need just to catch up with the backlog that we just didn't develop after the Great Recession. And then we've done very little to touch that need in Northern Door. Owner-occupied units, that would be largely single-family homes, also condos. We've got a need of 40 and 30 respectively, and you can see that virtually all of them are at price points of $60,000 to $125,000, and we currently don't have anything in that kind of stock really available, especially in Northern Door. Senior housing is something that really identifies all of the need being in that future window, 2018 and forward, but I can tell you that I'll bet you I had 50 calls from people that would meet this criteria right after our housing study came out saying that they would rent something or buy something tomorrow. So you're seeing substantial need here for the rental apartments, 60, 135, and now we see some need in Southern Door. And then the owner-occupied, nearly 600 units of owner-occupied between Central and Northern Door combined. And then the seasonal housing beds, which all of industry, all of our businesses have been solving this all along. I'm pleased to say that we do have one business plan in development that would put a little bit of a dent in some of this stuff. But this is the problem that's constantly been happening here for decades and decades in Door County, is dealing with the need for seasonal housing. The J1 visa worker workforce has gone over 500 now. It's grown for 5 consecutive years. And that certainly requires the need for these seasonal housing beds. So AECOM gave us a lot of recommendations. A lot of them we're moving forward on. So it talks about TIF, tax incremental financing. Of course, that help, we can potentially solve that in our villages and our city, but it doesn't give us anything with TIF that we can do in our townships, and we have several townships. And then the grant programs that we've already talked about. And then, of course, the collaboration amongst all of these groups. And as you can see, that's definitely happening, has been happening for some time. Specific actions, Mariah certainly went in depth, and she could go even deeper between she and Becky if you'd like to, on all of the depth of all the work that on zoning that's been taking place. And then encouraging a lot of different cooperation, collaboration between groups to help address the need. Marty?
Thanks again, Jim. All right, everybody loves to talk about zoning, so I drew the short straw. All right, these are some of the things that have already been put in place in either the city or the county. We do have several areas where you can have smaller lots to accommodate either small single-family homes or duplexes. We do have the ability to create what's known in the county as secondary dwelling units. In the city, they're called accessory dwelling units. What that is a second unit on a single-family lot. You know, think of the mother-in-law apartment or the Bonzi living above the garage type of thing. We're hopeful that that might be a means to create additional affordable units in the city and in the county. Then there's accessory residences. That is, think of the classic example is the apartment above a retail store or other commercial use. Allowances for duplexes. Surprisingly, there hasn't been a whole lot of movement for duplexes in Door County, even though there's been a number of zoning changes to help accommodate the provision for duplexes. Both the county and the city and the villages do allow multiple occupancy developments. In the city, we call those multifamily developments. So it is allowed. It just is there ways to encourage it. One thing that we can talk about is conservation subdivisions. Here's an example of a single-family accessory unit. Again, apartment above a garage. This is the classic example of accessory residences. You get a main street with apartments above. conservation subdivision example. These are kind of interesting because not only can you preserve parts of a property, maybe a woodland, a wetland or something, but you also can get efficiencies of infrastructure because of you can compare the left to the right and the number of lineal feet of roads and sewer and water and things that would have to be built to accommodate the same number of lots. All right, continuing on. Other things that might help with the housing situation, boarding houses and manufactured homes, those are allowed in most places. In the county, this doesn't apply to much of the city, but in the county, you can split off a farmhouse from an agricultural parcel, and you can also create a small lot of an agricultural parcel for like someone that's either a family member or working in the agricultural field. In the county, you have very large lot requirements, 20 acres, 35 acres, that type of thing. So it can be difficult to create affordable housing with that size lot sizes. So these are some things that have been implemented to help address that situation. And then a few other things that you see there, the tiny homes, there's some limited allowances for that. All right, things to still do. It's one thing to have your zoning code have a allowance for certain things. It's another thing that map it. So just because you create a district that allows for higher density doesn't mean it's going to happen if you don't actually map it in your community. We're seeing that in Sturgeon Bay particularly. Very difficult to find areas that can be used for apartments. Almost everything takes a rezoning or some other special zoning approval. Even that example that was shown earlier of the affordable single-family house that a local builder built in Sturgeon Bay, that required a variance to be able to create that infill lot. And it wasn't easy. It nearly got denied. We had another example of large apartment proposal needed to be rezoned, and due to some neighborhood oppositions, it didn't happen. So, one of the comments was, well, there should be plenty of more appropriate areas for this. Well, there really aren't. There's very few areas in the city that have infrastructure and have the zoning in place. So it is something we do need to consider. We still need to look at the zoning codes in the other incorporated municipalities, as well as Sturgeon Bay. There's things that we can do in Sturgeon Bay, like I mentioned about the multifamily developments. Make it easier to do apartments by right. There should be areas mapped and regulations in place that a developer can meet those, and boom, you get your permits rather than having to go through a whole series of approvals through either planning commission or the council. The minimum home size requirements. Many parts of Sturgeon Bay still require 1,400 square feet for a house. Now, if you're an empty nester or a widow or widower, that might be a bigger home than you want. You might be willing to build something smaller. Well, 1,400 is the minimum in most of our new home areas. Okay, now we're going to turn it over to Mariah, or no, to Diana, okay.
And I don't have another video. So now how do we get all this done? And as Jim mentioned, it is a collaboration amongst all of us. But as we were doing our homework, we considered a trust, and we looked around the country, and there are lots of places in the country that have what they call land trusts. That name had been taken. So we decided we would call ourselves a housing trust, and specifically the Door County Housing Partnership. And you're going to hear over time it just referred to as the housing trust. What does a trust do? It acquires and holds land in trust. By doing that, the land is not part of the overall home purchase or rental unit cost. And that makes housing more affordable. As you've heard, land here is extremely expensive. If we can take that portion of a development away from the cost, we've gone quite a ways. Housing Trust is a partner organization providing administrative assistance to interested municipalities, developers, and organizations. When some of us have talked to municipalities and about affordable housing, and they're very enthusiastic, But then when they think about, oh, well, now how do we determine who may apply or who will be accepted for affordable housing, that's not part of their business plan, so to speak, and they don't know how to get at it. That's one of the things a housing trust will do. Our trust was just incorporated in February, and we've just received nonprofit status. And now our next job is to develop the documents that we need, the criteria, to select applicants for whether it's a rental property or home ownership, and to then use additional documents to maintain the property or the affordable housing units in perpetuity. If we just put up affordable housing and don't do anything to protect it, 18 months from now, someone can just sell it and it becomes someone else's second home. So it's critical that if we're going through this effort of developing affordable housing throughout Door County, that we maintain it in perpetuity. And that when a unit is vacated, then another person who is eligible under the criteria is able to move in. So that's some of the things you see in the third bullet, that we look at occupant eligibility. One of the things we would certainly want to include would be year-round residency as in work, in part of the workforce, sorry. Also, if someone buys a unit, well, what happens? How do they get to accrue equity so that one day when their income is such that they feel they can move on and out of these particular housing units, do they get to take some equity with them? Absolutely. But it has to be set up so that they get to leave with equity, but yet that unit falls back into the affordable housing inventory. So that's really what a trust does. It's the administrative wing of, once the housing starts to become available, to make that available to those who need it in perpetuity. And just as a final note, well, not as a final note, but we are a fundraiser. Not only are we working with municipalities, but we will take private donations that we can then turn around and purchase property with. We are a fundraiser, an educator, and an advocate, and we also do a lot of research. Finally, we're independent nonprofit. Contributions of funds, land, or buildings, in some cases, are tax deductible according to the law. Thank you.
So what's next? There are a lot of next steps that we're accomplishing right now. We've heard probably enough about zoning to satisfy you for this evening. The housing partnership. A couple of important things to be aware of is on June 14th, on that Friday, we're going to be hosting a group of developers in Sturgeon Bay. This is something that we did with great success in the county where I previously served, and it helped working with those developers, working with them with individual sites, introducing them to elected officials, helping them with sources, helped catalyze a lot of attainable housing development. And we expect to do that same thing here. Later on this year, we'll do the same thing elsewhere in the county. One thing I want to stress is we're not going to see a 60-plex in Ellison Bay. That wouldn't reflect the real nature of that borough. So we're likely to see in Northern Door County smaller developments. But how many City of Sturgeon Bay elected officials do we have here tonight? Awesome. Thank you for coming, first of all. Thank you to all elected officials for participating. But we've got a real opportunity in Sturgeon Bay for urban. That would be anywhere in the proximity of West School, on the west side, up into the soon-to-be vacated in the next couple weeks, Nicolay building up on 4th Avenue. There's a strong drive nationally and regionally for urban places. People want walkable, they want bikeable. And Sturgeon Bay has that density that I think is going to help address that need. So there's a lot of opportunity throughout all of our municipalities throughout the county. Sturgeon Bay has that particular area of opportunity. So We've been working, I got here in July, we've been working with the city and the county and several municipalities on identifying specific sites. Liberty Grove has been very aggressive and progressive. Some months ago already, we've got something in Egg Harbor, some other opportunities, but we really want to put together a template and get some of this accomplished, and then of course celebrate success. So another question is well, what can the individual do? And you know what? There's a lot that you can do. Just one thing, all those one sheets, don't pitch them in the garbage when you get home. If you would pass them along to somebody else at church or at the breakfast shop or something the next day, take them with you and pass them along, because we need everyone to be advocates. The Pulse did a fantastic job last month with that sustainability issue. Did a great job of talking multifaceted issues on that. So there are a lot of things. Write a letter to the editor of support. A lot of misperception comes in with attainable housing. And as you can see with what Mariah demonstrated with some of the visuals here, this housing can be beautiful. And then please remember that video, that 5-minute video. You know, sometimes people's attention span don't get to the 20. That 5-minute video does a great job of demonstrating that these are neighbors. These folks were kind enough to step up. Run for office. A bunch of people did that in Sturgeon Bay, and that was transformational. Run for elected office. That's really important. And please, as you see development plans go forth, please come to a meeting and help echo support. I can tell you DCDC, our Attainable Committee, Outreach Committee, will certainly be doing everything to support our municipalities throughout the county that want to help address this issue, because it's really going to require all hands on deck. A note on here about Habitat for Humanity, currently doing their 42nd home. The average age of the people doing that right now is 70. So they definitely would welcome some additional folks coming on board and helping them. Bob Jeske, who's been with Habitat, was a great asset as we completed our 10th high school home build that we cut the ribbon on last night. Just some other things to keep in mind. You know, maybe you can take on a roommate. Lease your rental properties. I have heard a couple of stories, and I'm not trying to bully anybody, but I've heard a couple stories of apartments that were for workforce housing, and they're being turned into Airbnbs. I'm not going to bully Airbnbs and VRBOs. There's certainly a great space for that in our economy, but let's also take heart to the fact that we definitely have workforce housing that's needed here. And then consider that secondary, that Fonzie, is that what you said, Marty? That Fonzie house, is an opportunity that you may have. So with that, we'll welcome your questions, suggestions. If you could bring up the lights, please. And then just one thing about wages, that question came up during our unplanned interim there. We are seeing wage growth in Door County right now. I'm crunching the numbers on that, but I can tell you that most of our companies, for example, in the industrial park, have been going through some what I would say would be some aggressive adjustments in their wages. And Fincanterry Bay Ship is a union shop. That last union contract showed some nice increases there too. So we are seeing some of that growth. It's never enough, but I don't want to pick on our employers. Questions?
Here, I'll bring a microphone.
I was just questioning the reason why the collapse or cancellation of building project, a multi-unit project at County U and Tacoma Beach Road failed.
Technically, the developer withdrew that application, but it was sort of writing on the wall. That required what's known as a planned unit development in Sturgeon Bay. Any multifamily projects that have 25 or more units automatically have to go through that process. And in addition to needing that, the comprehensive plan that the city has, and we're just now beginning to update our comprehensive plan, but currently the land use designation for that site was for lower density. And the current zoning was for up to 4-unit buildings. And so we had to have the public hearing. There was considerable opposition in the area to that. And while the Planning Commission did not actually make a decision on it, the developer did withdraw. But I think it would have been very difficult for that to get approved given the amount of neighborhood opposition to those apartments.
One of the reasons why that was objected by the neighbors is the fact that there is so much traffic over in that area, and the city didn't even want to address that fact. That was not even talked about.
There were several objections raised by the neighborhood. Traffic was one of them.
Yes, it was.
It is a state highway, so there's less ability to address that. The city did attempt to require the developer to put in a payment to help address intersection improvements at that County U, Claybanks Road, and the highway intersection.
But it was never talked about to the citizens.
I'm not sure if I understand that comment.
That as citizens, we were never told anything about, you know, what was planned for that area as far as roadways or anything else.
Yeah, currently there's nothing planned there.
No,
with
there
the
isn't.
addition of the proposed apartments, it was felt that would necessitate some intersection improvements at County U. But short of building anything out there, it's highly unlikely that you're going to see major intersection improvements. There's just not enough traffic to warrant things like a roundabout like was put at Michigan Street or signals like we have at Neenah.
I'll get over there.
Hi, I'm Chuck Stone. I'm the construction supervisor at Habitat for Humanity here in Door County. I have a question about the housing trust. The property itself is going to be a part of the trust. How would a city tax that as far as property goes? Go ahead.
We still need to figure out all the particulars. That's actually on our list of things to research in the next week. No, it literally is. I think probably what would happen is that because the land is going to be owned by a nonprofit, that the structure would be the only thing that pays property taxes. But I'm not positive about that, and we've actually talked a little bit at the trust level about that not necessarily being viewed as a positive thing by the municipalities, so maybe we should do something along the lines of payment in lieu of, but we have yet to figure out the exact details.
Okay, thank you.
Who builds on your trust land then?
The developers that are interested, and that we work with the developers, we being this whole group, to make sure that what they are proposing fits in nicely with the environment around it. But it would be the developers.
Is there a way to limit Airbnbs, the number of them, or the number of days they can rent to make that a little less appealing or taking up so much space?
Good question. The state has a lot of control on that, so they've taken away local control on some of those things. There are some policy things that the municipality could do, but I'll be pragmatic, and we've kind of had some email conversations on this. This is not a proposal, we could wipe out every VRBO and Airbnb in the county and maybe impact 5 to 10 units that might become the criteria of attainable housing. So they're not the boogeyman in this. They're actually helping the vibrancy of the county. And so, you know, our focus is on developing on sites that would be trust sites and that sort of things, other sites that we've identified, and then bringing in certain mechanisms like weed tax credit projects, neighbor works projects.
Okay, I don't even know if there's an answer to this question. I think it's just something that I think all of us as neighbors and such can help out with. And this kind of does piggyback the Airbnb short-term rental thing. You know, I think some of our homes just aren't affordable, and so they are on the short-term rental market. And two, we have a lot of residents in this area that don't want to rent anymore to short-term rentals or long-term rentals. And I'm not quite sure we even go to promote it within our own residents that have places to rent. And where is it that maybe some of our workforce, some of our, wire techs, our factories, our base ship, where can they help to give these people the programs, the actual information that they need in order to go about getting more long-term rental or purchasing a house, or here are the things that you need for your family to succeed. But I think that there has become a huge issue with people that do own here with wanting to even rent long-term. Whether good, bad, indifferent, I'm not judging any of that right now. But there's got to be a little bit more community effort on the positive parts of also renting long-term, because a lot of people that I know won't do it anymore. They just won't. Their houses have been ruined. So what either the owner needs to be a little bit more enlightened on where they can go to get help if their property is ruined, and also where do our workforce go to find the help to find the appropriate housing. It is kind of two-sided that way. I don't know if that's even a question, sorry.
This isn't going to address everything, and I think we would probably all agree with you. I mean, I know the Economic Development Corporation and the city over the years have tried doing, going to some of the larger businesses in the city to do home buyer education, like little mini classes at lunchtime or things like that, because most people don't want to go sit through the 6 or 8 hours at Lakeshore Cap for home buyer education. So I know there has been outreach like that by the city and DC EDC. That short little video that I talked about that was done in 2017, that was part of the idea behind that. And we've actually talked to Myles a little bit about having Peninsula Filmworks do some other videos that might be, jazzier things on YouTube that might catch people's attention, as far as I had no idea when I was looking at buying a house that I would have qualified for anything. And similar to what you asked earlier, I would have. And so we need to try and figure out creative ways to get that information across to people. As far as the rental angle, I'm not really sure how we do that. I think there definitely is a fair amount of housing that's being converted to short-term transient rentals. And my guess is it's because of maybe not great experiences with long-term rentals, but it's better. It's much better money. I think Myles wants to talk.
This probably applies more to people in Northern Door, but raise your hand if you've heard a complaint about the housing at Camp David Fish Stock in Fish Creek. There's one. All right. Landmark Resort. Birch Creek Music Performance Center. Birch Creek has a dorm. They host a bunch of high school students. Landmark has a dorm. They host a bunch of young workers every single year for the last 25 years. Camp David has basically been the only kind of seasonal apartment complex in Northern Door for my entire lifetime. And you'd think, with all the ways that we all know neighbors speak up, but you haven't seen any of those complaints. I don't hear them. I'm at the paper every day. I've never seen a single email come across about them. So there's a perception that short-term seasonal summer residents are this huge problem and they're just going to destroy things and nobody wants them in their backyard. There's a perception that rental apartments at a lower income level are going to ruin our neighborhood and nobody wants them in their backyard. But you don't actually see the reality of that. Yes, there's problems. I've been that bad renter. I have lost a couple of security deposits, but there's also some perception from landlords, especially local up here, having lived several years in Chicago, where landlords are much more cognizant of the laws regarding what you have to provide to a renter. Up here, most of them aren't. A lot of the people who rent out their home aren't cognizant of that at all. They think they can, you move out, well, you should have to pay to redo my rug, and I'm gonna have to have anything cleaned, you're gonna pay for my cleaner, I'm gonna keep your security deposit to repaint the walls. You can't do any of that thing. Legally, you can't do that. But most renters don't know that, so they get shafted on that too. So there's a lot of non-resident landlords up here that do a lot of these seasonal housing. They're not around to take care of maintenance. I've been the guy who rented houses that, all right, I put the plastic on the walls, I do the maintenance, I cut the lawn, I do everything just to make that guy keep renting his home so I don't have to move every 6 months or a year. I lived in 15 to 17, I lose track, 15 to 17 different houses between age 19 and 32 in Door County. Always full-time employed with multiple jobs, but I begged people to take things off of a seasonal weekly vacation rental so that I could rent it. And after a couple of years, I actually persisted and got someone to do that for me. But that's the kind of situation that exists out there. I don't know, that may have been more of a story than an answer.
So 2.5 years ago, a little over, my wife and I moved up here from Green Bay, and we rented a home for 2.5 years. We made a decision in January to go out and see what the home market was in Sturgeon Bay. And it was either buying or building. We're kind of looking into the different options. And underneath the $200,000 price point, well, 150 to 200 grand, you're dumping $30,000 into your home. You're gutting everything out of it because the carpets are terrible. It needs new cabinets. It needs a new kitchen. So you have 30 grand going into this thing. So then we said, well, if we're going to put 30 grand down, we might as well build a nice new home and put the down money on a new home. And we found out that you cannot build a home in Sturgeon Bay that's under 1,400 square feet. It's my wife and I. We don't have kids. We need a 1,000 square foot home with a 3-car garage. I got toys, right? I'm just saying. And we wouldn't build a crummy 1,000 square foot home. It would be a nice home. And I asked the developer, I said, he said, you can't build that. You'd have to put a walkout basement underneath it. So that jacked the price up to 260 grand. Well, I'm not doing that. So I asked him, why can't we build a smaller home in Sturgeon Bay? And basically it's because he said, if you put a $200,000 home next to a $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 home, what happens to the value of their home, and what happens to the value of your home?
I don't have information on what would do to the value of the neighboring home, but what I can at least give you a little perspective on the size of the house. During the presentation, you heard me talk about how that's one of the issues I think needs to be looked at. Many years ago, the first go-around of the city of Sturgeon Bay looking at its zoning code for impediments to affordable housing occurred in the pre-recession. And a whole checklist of potential ordinance changes were developed and studied by the Plan Commission. One of the changes, we have two, I'm gonna back up a second. We have really two main single-family residential districts. One of them requires a 1,000 square foot home. The other one requires a 1,400 square foot home. The 1,000 square foot home is basically the old parts of the city. The 1,400 square foot district is all the new parts of the city and pretty much all the vacant lots. And the recommendation was to drop those to 800 and 1,200. Well, the city did adopt going to 800 in the older parts of the city, but there's only a handful of still vacant lots there. They opted to keep it at 1,400 in the newer parts of the city. So again, it didn't really address the issue that people like yourself that don't need that size of a home. We even had a Habitat for Humanity lot, donated lot, and it broke my heart to tell them they had to build 1,400 square feet. They were able to do it and then said never again. And so now when they get our R1 lots, the 1,400 requirement, they'll put those on the market and then try to buy other lots that they can do the 1,000 square foot. So I feel your pain, and it's probably time to look at the code again, and and maybe there's a way to apply a zoning district to newer parts of the city, particularly brand new subdivisions. I get how old subdivisions that are half built, would maybe want to stick with 1,400 when, 85% of the lots are already built on. But if we could ever get some new development, maybe trying to apply more of our smaller home requirements to those new lots would be the answer.
So if you're in county zoning, and so the city does its own zoning, the county administers zoning in 9 out of the 14 towns, and our minimum house size is only 750 square feet. And then if you're going to do a 3-bedroom home, I think it goes up to 1,000. But we're talking about dumping the 1,000 and just keeping that 750, no matter whether you're going to have 1 bedroom or 12. So that's already in place in county zoning. And then it gets super confusing because the 4 villages have their own zoning, and then 2 of the other 5 towns where the county does not have jurisdiction have their own zoning.
We also have a new issue in the area where Bay Ship is contracting short-term, like the welders come in for 3 months, then they leave, and then the fitters come in for 3 months, and then they leave. So they subcontract them, which also affects those of us who do rentals. Then those guys don't want leases, which means, that changes the whole, that's more of a turnover, which makes it less cost-effective to run some of those. So some of that is an issue.
I will say, the gentleman who just mentioned the home size issue, that is precisely the story that needs to be in front of your municipal boards all the time in this county, in every single community, because in covering almost every municipality in this county at one time or another, anytime there's a housing-related issue, and this is happening in the town of Gibraltar right now, probably tonight as I'm speaking, where they have just mentioned the word affordable housing. And who comes out? Nobody who needs that housing. None of the business owners who need the employees who would live in that housing so that they can even open their doors. None of the people involved in the economy on that level are showing up at those meetings. The neighbors who don't want them, that don't want that housing, that don't want the affordable housing, that's who shows up at those meetings, and they show up in droves, and they are loud, and they give much longer speeches than I'm giving right now. And that affects how, your municipal officials, I'm sure every one of them in here would second what I just said, and that affects how they vote and how they make decisions, because that's who you're hearing. So the people that need this, especially the business owners, I really think that the way to turn the tide in Door County when it comes to affordable housing and getting some actual creative thinking passed, because some people have proposed creative solutions in the past, but who hasn't been there are the business owners. And I know that they can say, and I used to run a bar that was open 365 days a year, every single night until 2 a.m. I didn't have a lot of time either. But I tell you what, neither do the people up on this stage. I see how many meetings they go to and how much time goes into getting this data together. But they show up because they care. And the business owners have to care about their own community and start showing up and advocating for the things they need, instead of, and I was guilty of this in the past too, of, well, someone should do something about housing. That someone is you. So, sorry, I'll step off my pedestal.
I have 2 comments. My name is Megan Dietz. I work for Door County Habitat for Humanity. Thank you very much for trying to help us recruit some more volunteers. He's not kidding. Our average age last year was 70.8 for our build volunteers, so we could definitely use more volunteers and younger volunteers. The other thing that we have a real shortage of is applicants. So if you know somebody that's struggling to find affordable housing, please send them our way. Last year we didn't start until mid-June on our build because we didn't have a family before mid-June. So we know the needs out there, we know people need it, but there's a lot of reasons they're not applying. But if you know somebody that's struggling for affordable housing, please send them towards Habitat. We need volunteers and we need families to build for.
Megan, can you quickly review what the basic criteria would be to apply, so we send the correct people your way?
Yes. Income has to be at or below 60% of the median income that they talked about, and we have what those exact numbers are based on family size. They have to have lived in Door County for the last 12 months before they apply. Have to be over 18, at least one person in the family does, so they can legally sign the contracts. They have to be willing to contribute time towards their home build. Every adult in a partner family is required to contribute 200 hours. They can get help from their friends and family for half of that. So they do have to contribute the time towards it. There's no fee to apply, but when a building agreement is signed, they do have to provide $500 of earnest money. And I think that's all the basic requirements. There's a lot more paperwork involved and things that we look more, can they make the mortgage payments and all of that, but those are the basic requirements to send somebody our way.
And Megan, they have to be denied a traditional loan,
Yes,
correct?
thank you, that's the last one. You have to go to a traditional lender, so a bank or credit union can be any one of them, and be denied for a traditional mortgage.
Thank you. I wanted to add one thing. Becky's been working hard on a new website, which we keep forgetting to talk about, but we bought the domain name housingdoorcounty.org. And the basic idea is to have, and we haven't figured out exactly how we're going to organize it, but information for people that are renting or who want to rent or who want to buy, or for a municipality that wants to do something, and to have information about all of these programs so that people can then, we'll basically be making links to a lot of other organizations, but we can put little blurbs like all the stuff that you just rattled off. If this applies to you, you can go talk to Habitat. And so that's what we're going to try and do. And we're hoping that we will have that up and running by the end of the summer. Yes, actually, if you put your email address on the sign-in sheet, I will let you know when the website's up and running. And that's one of the places actually that we're going to post tonight's presentation. I think we're also just going to post it on the Land Use Services website. I don't know if EDC is going to post it, but we can post all the handouts and everything as well.
I have two questions for the trust. One is, you've talked several times about working with the municipalities. Could you expand on that a little bit? And then the other question is, how different is the trust from a housing authority?
So Door County has a housing authority, and what the Door County Housing Authority does is provide rental assistance, the federal dollars through that, again, it's called Section 8 program. Housing authorities in the country are allowed to do things that are similar to a housing trust, but it's a lot more complicated and there's a lot more statutes that apply. So as a nonprofit, we can partner with anybody that's willing to partner with us to develop housing that'll remain in affordable in perpetuity. But in Door County, the Door County Housing Authority just does that rental assistance program. They do have some people every now and then that are able to transfer that to home ownership, but not very many families have done that in Door County. As far as how we partner with municipalities, like Jim and Diana have both said, there's a couple of towns plus the city that are looking right now at either acquiring or possibly rezoning land that they own in order to try and entice a developer to come and do affordable housing. The trust would be the piece where they can ensure that that housing is actually going to go to workforce folks, and that once it turns over, it's still going to be workforce, because I forget who said it, but with all that money that's been cycling through Door County that I had on the one slide, so millions and millions of dollars from WIDA, and I'm going to out Debbie right now, we have our very own WIDA rep here in the room, and through USDA Rural Development, we've had over $40 million come through the county in the last 20 years, but there's no guarantee that after that person gets the WIDA loan, that then the next buyer is going to be somebody who is workforce or who isn't buying it necessarily as a second home. And so hopefully the trust will be the piece that can help a lot of that. Rather than churning money constantly, we can hopefully slowly establish, or maybe not so slowly, a stock of affordable housing.
I have another question on zoning. I'm seeing in some of the other larger urban centers around the country a change from lots of different types of zoning. So you've got single family zoning, multi-family zoning, dense zoning, and then you've got same thing, light commercial, heavy commercial, blah, 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 blah. It goes on and on and on. So you've got 10 to 15 different types of zoning. Some municipalities are breaking that down so that there's a commercial zone, a residential zone, a industrial zone, and then it allows the flexibility for the Planning Commission and the Zoning Board to take those bigger categories and be creative so that you've got the multifamily, the single family in just that housing zone. Can anyone talk to that and if that's going to be part of the comprehensive plan?
I'll talk about the county zoning ordinance, and then Marty can explain about the city. So in the county zoning ordinance, we are guilty of having about 20 zoning districts, but that's because along the way, and Marty helped write the ordinance that's in place right now, towns, that, I'm not blaming him. No, I'm not. I didn't mean it that way. I meant, he might have more background than I do, because there were towns that in order to get them to sign on to county zoning wanted their very own special district. So that's why we have so many districts. But the way the county zoning ordinance is set up, even in the most restrictive of residential districts, there is still some level of commercial activity allowed. So you can have like a low impact home occupation or something like that. And then conversely, in the county's commercial districts, every single one of them allows housing, whether it's single family or multifamily or duplexes or whatever. So we do have in the county zoning ordinance a pretty good mixture of things that are allowed in the different zoning districts. But we suffer from the same problem that Marty talked about earlier, which is that there's not a whole lot of vacant land sitting around that's in one of those commercial districts that allows multifamily zoning, or in the residential district that we have that allows for multifamily zoning.
We all know that Liberty Grove is so much different than the town of Bailey's Harbor that they have to have their own district. But Mariah's right. There was a lot of compromises that were made back in the day just to get the whole county under the countywide zoning ordinance. I think your question, you might be referring to something that's called form-based zoning codes. In a traditional Euclidean zoning, it's the use that pretty much dictates the district. You're an agricultural use, you're industrial use, you're residential use. Under form-based zoning, it sort of flips it over, and it's more about the form of development and not the use. So it might set up a density requirement, it might set up a build-to line. So if you're in a downtown area, the zoning district might specify, all right, you need to build within 5 feet of the sidewalk to maintain that urban facade. We don't care what your use is, and you shall have at least 2-story building if you're like in downtown Sturgeon Bay, for instance, and things of that nature. So it can be much more flexible in terms of use, but it's not necessarily more flexible in terms of everything, because it does have regulations. So some communities have adopted that. One of the things that we are asking whoever we hire as a planning consultant to look at as an option for Sturgeon Bay is form-based zoning. We don't have that in Sturgeon Bay currently. One thing that we do use regularly, though, another way to be flexible, is something called Planned Unit Development Zoning, PUD. The acronym is a little bit different from community to community, but that's a special district that has its own rules, uses and densities and things of that nature, designed specifically for a project. So for instance, it was mentioned the former WireTech redevelopment site that the city did. That's under what's a planned unit development district. It actually, in order to fit all those 17 lots in there, we couldn't just say, oh yeah, zone it R2 or R3 or something. It went to work because of the standards in place in those districts. So instead, there's a zoning district just for that area that has standards geared to what we're trying to accomplish. So the required side yards, the required home sizes, the required lot sizes, all that was kind of set up ahead of time to meet the vision of what the neighborhood and the city as a whole wanted for that site. So that's another way to be flexible. More questions?
Just one, and thank you. Marty and Jim, I was wondering if perhaps you could expand on for the audience the nature of competition for development dollars and investment in communities. It's one of the obstacles I think I've experienced is convincing the development community that Door County is a good risk for their investment dollar and that they can meet their numbers or meet their margins, so to speak.
I'll say a word or two about that and turn it over to Jim. We have had developers tell us, I can build the exact same project in Port Washington for less and get more in rent, so I don't want to do it in Door County. We do hear that once in a while. One of the reasons that we pushed for this housing market study was to market the county, to be able to show that there indeed is a need. It's not just people talking, it's documented numbers, that we could take to the development community to try to entice them to do a development. Now, clearly, any developer worth their company is going to do their own study. They're not going to just take it, take our word for it. But it might be enough to at least get them started.
It's an awesome question. It's important for folks to know that is that people are plowing millions of dollars into a development when they do that, and they're taking on tremendous risk when they do that. So they're always adverse to any sort of controversy when they see that development that you were talking about off of you and Claybanks there. When other people see that happen, they might not know the whole story. I'm talking about developers here, but they tend to run away, and they'd probably prefer to invest their money into Pier or some other place as a result of that. So the city and DCDC meet every week. They've been doing it for years, collaborating on priorities, and among those, it's about selling the county. When we're working on the county and when we're focusing on the city, it's selling the city. And so it's important that we put our best foot forward, and so controversies that have impacted Sturgeon Bay in the past have harmed development. I'm hoping that we're coming to a place, I've been one of the people serving on the West Side Waterfront ad hoc. I'm hoping we're getting to a place where we're going to have a recommendation for the city council to take up that'll be a good step forward, because I think that's really important for those developers to come in. Well, why does that matter? And I mentioned the urban thing's important. It's the tax base, right? So some of those households, even if they're apartments, they're going to have kids, students that are going to be in our school districts. And those students bring revenue to those school districts. That's where the funding comes from. And of course, that tax base that we come in, it's the vibrancy for our retail economy. So in some cases, Josh, as you know, we have to overcome those things. I can tell you that in the county that I served in previously, when there was a dust up taking place here, I mean, you kind of look at that and you say, well, I'm glad I'm not having to deal with that. And you're dealing with developers and landing them in your county. And now all of a sudden Shidwar calls me and wants to have coffee. Now here I am, and now, it's part of my responsibility to help get that turned around. But it's important that we be on the same page. And it's important that we put those controversies behind us, because otherwise those investors just won't put that development here. And I guess I'll add one more thing to that as it relates to Sturgeon Bay, is the population had been going through, for the past 15 years, a downtrend. It's gone from about 9,400 to about 8,900. We certainly are in a position where we can turn that around. It did move up very slightly this past year, and it's really important, because otherwise we have fewer people taking the responsibility for more and more costs, because the costs collectively never ever go down. It's just the nature of costs and inflation.
Just one point that Mariah had just reminded me of that was in the slide, but something to hammer home is I graduated high school in 1997. Since that year, in the collective 4 mainland schools, we've lost nearly 500 students in our high schools alone. So why does that matter when it comes to housing? Because if any, like myself, you're working 40 to 80 hours a week as a high school student. Most of the friends I went to high school with, working for their parents, working in restaurants, working for hotels. Generally, you'd actually start that at like age 11 or 12, honestly. But I just calculate it by the high schoolers. A lot of the folks that I knew from Sturgeon Bay growing up were Sturgeon Bay kids who drove to northern Door County to work at Al Johnson's, to work in the restaurants, to work at, my dad owns an Inn and Egg Harbor. He always gets his employees from, once I graduated out of my dad's employment, from the Sturgeon Bay area, or even Southern Door. People are driving up from there to work as housekeepers and front desk managers. You lose those high school kids, that means that you lose 500 students who had housing built in to their lives. So now you have to replace that with housing, and that ties pretty closely to what Jim said about 500 J1 students now. They all need housing. So that has put extra pressure on what exists now, especially when it comes to seasonal housing. It's one of the reasons why you see more people kind of reacting to the Airbnb VRBO market, because of that combined pressure on that marketplace. So I think that's important to consider, and as you lose housing, as you lose affordable housing, you just lose more and more of those high school students. So it compounds the problem as we become more of a vacation destination with less year-round residents, with smaller families, or no families at all because the young people can't afford to get their foot in the door and live here. Northern Door is a particular problem because you saw the slide about teachers, which basically says if you're a teacher in Door County, you can't really afford anything. In Northern Door, it's more pronounced. So even when I was in high school, a lot of our teachers at Gibraltar, where I went, lived in Sturgeon Bay. And now it's become even more exacerbated over the ensuing 20 years. So what happens? You get a teacher at Gibraltar, and maybe Sevastopol grapples with this as well, but they live in Sturgeon Bay. So then when they have kids, their kids go to Sturgeon Bay or Southern Door, and then you don't have those kids going into your own district. And then the teachers end up, and where you really start to lose, is that the teachers are not invested in that community, because as soon as school day ends, they need to get down and do things with their kids or coach their kids in other school districts. That all starts to compound itself, and Northern Door has been grappling with that for a while. I would guess that Sturgeon Bay and Southern Door, as you see some of these housing prices, this gap continue, you're going to see more of your teachers living in maybe Kewaunee County or Brown County or Green Bay, because it's just that much cheaper. So it really does, the way this trickles down through every part of our economy and our community is pretty profound. Any other questions, or should we let you all go? Thank you all for coming out.